I didn't mean to send it to him. God, I swear I didn't. It was just one of those half-awake moments when your hands move faster than your mind, when your phone feels like an extension of your exhaustion, and the world is blurry from too much surviving. I was sitting in that cramped little kitchen, with the cracked tiles and the humming fridge that always sounded like it was gasping for air, holding a lukewarm cup of tea that had long since stopped pretending to be comforting, and staring at the ultrasound photo glowing softly on my screen. It wasn't supposed to go to him. I was trying to send it to Marla, my best friend, the only person who knew I was pregnant, the only one who didn't look at me like I was fragile glass, ready to shatter under the weight of my own choices. But my fingers betrayed me. My phone buzzed with nerves. I was clumsy with grief and sleeplessness. I scrolled through my contacts and saw his name, Adrian Moretti, still there, still haunting the corner of my digital life, like a ghost that refused to be deleted. I should have erased it the night I ran. I should have wiped him out of every place he could find me. But I didn't. And so the universe, cruel as always, decided to make me pay for my hesitation. The photo sent before I could blink. That familiar whoosh sound sliced through the silence like a blade, and my heart stopped. My stomach dropped, and I stared in horror at the tiny blue bubble that contained my entire undoing. The image of the ultrasound, dated just a week ago, the little bean-shaped miracle with a heartbeat strong enough to make me cry when I first saw it, was now sitting in his message window, unread, for 3 seconds, maybe 4, before the status changed. Seen. Then came the typing bubbles, and that's when my breath caught in my throat, my pulse racing so violently I thought the walls were closing in around me. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, watching those 3 dots appear and disappear like flickers of fate, as if he was trying to decide whether to kill me with words or silence. When the message finally came through, I didn't expect what I saw. Where are you? 3 words. No punctuation. No emotion. Just the raw authority of a man who had always been obeyed. I froze, staring at those words until the letters blurred together, until my eyes stung and I had to look away. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. I wanted to type something, anything, to explain, to say it was a mistake, that it wasn't what he thought, that I wasn't trying to reach him, that I didn't want him to know. But another message appeared before I could move. Get in the helicopter. Now. The sound of my heartbeat became unbearable, echoing in my ears like thunder trapped inside a cage. No greeting, no question, no mercy, just a command. For a second, I thought maybe he was joking, or worse, testing me. But then I heard it, a low, distant rumble that didn't belong in my sleepy little town. A sound that built in the air like a warning, a mechanical growl that made the window panes tremble. I ran to the window, pulling back the thin curtain, and saw it. A black helicopter cutting through the pale morning sky, its blades churning the air, glinting in the rising sun like a predator's wings. My phone buzzed again. Another message. I said now, Amelia. He never called me by my name unless he was angry or afraid. I stumbled backward, pressing my hand against the counter as panic crashed through me. How had he found me? I'd been so careful. Changed my number twice, moved across state lines, paid cash for the apartment, even worked under a fake last name at the small diner near the highway. I thought I had outrun his world, the one filled with guns and men who spoke in silence, who bowed to no law but his. But Adrian Moretti was not a man who lost things, not money, not power, and apparently not me. The first time I met him, I thought he was danger disguised as temptation, the kind of man your soul recognizes before your mind has the chance to resist. He had eyes like smoke and sin, dark enough to drown you, and a voice that could slice through any pretense of safety. He never smiled without purpose, never touched without claiming. I'd told myself I was just another fleeting thrill to him, a distraction between deals and bloodshed. But the way he looked at me, like I was something rare, something breakable, had made me believe I could be the exception. And now, standing there with my heart in my throat and the echo of those blades outside, I realized that maybe I was the exception, but not in the way I wanted to be. I grabbed my bag, my coat, my phone, moving on instinct, but every step felt like a mistake I couldn't undo. The sound of the helicopter grew louder, closer, vibrating through the floorboards. My neighbors would think it was some kind of emergency drill, maybe a rich fool lost on his way to the city. But I knew better. Adrian didn't send anyone. He came himself. Because when Adrian Moretti wanted something, he took it. I ran outside, the cold air slicing across my face. The field beyond the apartment complex was already filling with dust and wind from the helicopter's descent. My hair whipped around my face, my coat snapping against my legs. And then I saw him. He stepped out as if the world itself parted for him. Tall, dark, wrapped in that tailored coat that screamed old money and new power, his expression unreadable behind black sunglasses. The moment our eyes met, every ounce of distance I'd built over the past 3 months vanished, replaced by a rush of heat and memory I didn't want. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The noise around us didn't matter, not the blades, not the shouting of his men, not the way my heart was unraveling in my chest. He just looked at me, taking in the sight of me, my small, shaking frame, my trembling hands, clutching my coat, the faint curve that was only just beginning to show. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared, and I saw it. The realization, the fury, the betrayal. He took a slow step forward. "Get in," he said, his voice low but commanding, the kind of tone that didn't invite argument. I wanted to scream, to tell him he had no right, that I didn't belong to him anymore, that the baby wasn't his. But the words wouldn't come, because I knew that look in his eyes. I'd seen it before, the moment before he made a decision that couldn't be undone. I swallowed hard, shaking my head. "Adrian, please." He cut me off with a single sharp movement of his hand. "Not here. Not now. You want to talk? We'll talk in the air." My pulse hammered so hard I thought I'd faint. My mind screamed to run, to hide, to disappear again. But deep down, beneath the fear and the anger, there was something else, something dangerously close to relief. Because no matter how hard I tried to forget him, no one had ever looked at me the way he did, with that impossible mix of rage and reverence, of obsession and pain. And as I stood there, staring at the man who had once both ruined and saved me, I realized the truth that terrified me most. Part of me had known this day would come, the day he found out, the day he came for me, the day I stopped running. The wind howled as I took one step forward, then another, until his hand closed around mine, strong, warm, familiar, and pulled me toward the waiting helicopter. I didn't know if I was walking into safety or damnation, but as the doors shut behind us and the city disappeared below, I understood one thing with chilling clarity. This wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. And somewhere between the roar of the blades and the silence of his stare, I knew that whatever waited in the next chapter of my life would destroy the girl I used to be. Because Adrian Moretti never took back what was his. The sound of the helicopter blades faded into the storm of my heartbeat, a rhythm too fast, too loud, as if my body already knew I was stepping back into the kind of danger I had once promised myself I would never face again. And yet there I was, sitting across from him in the small, sleek cabin that smelled like cold metal, cologne, and memory. My trembling fingers pressed against my stomach, as if my touch alone could shield the fragile secret that had already betrayed me. Adrian sat across from me, his posture unnervingly calm, one hand resting on his knee, the other clasped around a glass of something amber and potent that caught the light like fire. And though the space between us was small, it felt like a chasm, an invisible battlefield layered with all the things we hadn't said and all the things we never should have done. His jaw was clenched, sharp and unforgiving, the muscle ticking every so often when his gaze flicked toward me, and each time his eyes met mine, I felt as if the air was pulled straight out of my lungs, leaving me weightless and afraid. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't, because no matter how much I hated him, no matter how much I wanted to believe I'd escaped, part of me was still addicted to that gravity he carried, that dangerous magnetism that made everything and everyone bend toward him. He didn't speak for a long time. The silence between us was suffocating, a heavy, invisible thing that seemed to fill every inch of the cabin until even the hum of the rotors felt muted beneath it. I could almost hear my thoughts echoing, the desperate voice in my head whispering, "Say something, anything, before he does." But before I could, his voice, low, rough, and far too familiar, sliced through the quiet like a blade. "How long?" he asked. Just 2 words, but they hit me with the force of a confession. I swallowed hard, forcing my gaze out the window where the city blurred beneath us, streaks of light fading into the horizon. 12 weeks, I whispered, and the words felt like shards of glass on my tongue, cutting deeper the longer I held them inside. He leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing, the faintest flicker of emotion flashing across his face, something between disbelief and fury, quickly buried beneath the ice he wore like armor. 12 weeks, he repeated softly, almost to himself, then louder, harsher. 12 weeks, and you didn't think to tell me? The weight of his voice pressed against my chest until breathing became a conscious act. You weren't supposed to know, I said quietly, but my voice shook, betraying the truth behind my words. He gave a short, humorless laugh, the kind that carried no warmth, only bitterness. Weren't supposed to know? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on me. You think that's something you can hide from me, Amelia? You think you can just disappear, and I'll forget you existed? I wanted to scream that yes, that was exactly what I thought, that I had believed distance would break whatever thread still connected us, that time would dull his memory the way it dulled mine, that I could build a life where his name was just a scar I didn't touch anymore. But when I looked at him, when I saw that shadow in his gaze, that impossible blend of hurt and possessiveness, I knew I had never truly escaped him, not in the way that mattered. So instead, I said the only thing I could. You scared me. The words hung between us, trembling, small and raw and honest in a way that stripped every pretense away. For the first time, something cracked in his expression, a flicker of something that almost looked like regret. But it was gone before I could be sure. He turned his face away, the muscles in his neck tightening. I warned you what this life meant, he said, after a long pause, his tone softer now, though still cold around the edges. I told you not to fall for me. I didn't plan to, I whispered. And even as I said it, a bitter laugh broke in my throat, because the truth was, no one plans to fall in love with a man like Adrian Moretti. It just happens the way storms happen, suddenly, destructively, leaving nothing the same when they pass. My mind slipped back to the night we met. The velvet darkness of that bar downtown, the smoke curling in the air, the faint pulse of jazz beneath the low murmur of danger. I had gone there because I wanted to feel alive again after too many gray, predictable years. He had walked in wearing that quiet kind of power, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because the room shifted for him. He sat beside me, asked what I was drinking, and I remember thinking that no one had ever said my name like that before, like a promise and a warning all at once. From that night on, everything blurred. The late dinners in penthouses overlooking the city, the whispers of his men in the hallways, the way his hands felt when they traced the line of my spine as if memorizing a secret. I should have run the first time I saw the gun holstered beneath his suit, but instead, I kissed him harder, thinking I could rewrite the rules of a man born in violence. The night I finally left, the world burned. It had been just past midnight when the knock came at his door. Sharp, urgent, Wrong. I remember the way he looked at me, the way he told me to stay in the bedroom and lock the door, and how my heart splintered when I heard the first shot. When I crept out, when I saw him standing there with blood on his hands and eyes black as sin. I knew whatever fragile love I had built around him could never survive the reality of who he was. That was the night I ran, barefoot, shaking, leaving behind everything except the fear that one day he would find me again. And now he had. "Amelia," he said suddenly, my name low, almost tender on his lips, though the steel in his tone never wavered. "If that child is mine, you don't get to hide. Not from me, not from this." I flinched at the word child, the way it rolled off his tongue as if it were a claim, a possession, not a life. My hand instinctively found my stomach again, as though to shield it from the weight of his voice. "You think I wanted this?" I said quietly, my voice breaking under the strain. "You think I planned any of it?" "I just wanted peace, Adrian. I wanted quiet. I wanted a life where I didn't wake up wondering whose blood was on your hands." His jaw tightened again, but this time there was no anger, only silence, heavy and suffocating. He looked at me for a long time, his expression unreadable, then finally spoke in a voice so low I almost didn't hear it. "You really think peace exists for people like us?" Something in me cracked at that, because for the first time I saw what lay beneath all his power, the emptiness, the exhaustion, the weight of a life built on control and fear. But before I could answer, the helicopter began to descend, the sound of the city growing louder, the lights below forming rivers of gold and glass. I looked out the window and saw it, his penthouse, that towering fortress of glass and steel where I had once lost myself in him, where love had tasted like danger and every kiss felt like surrender. My throat tightened as realization sank in. He wasn't taking me home. He was taking me back. The rotors slowed, the city swallowed us whole, and when the doors opened, the scent of his world, expensive, sterile, suffocating, rushed in to meet me like a ghost I'd never exorcised. He stepped out first, turning to look at me with that same unreadable gaze, the kind that told me I had no choice left to make. "Welcome back, cara mia," he said softly, his words a caress and a threat all at once. And as I followed him into that glittering cage, one thought burned in my chest, fierce and cold. I had escaped once, but this time, he wasn't going to let me go. Not alive. Not in love. Not at all. The moment the helicopter lifted from the rooftop, I felt the last remnants of the life I had built for myself fall away, crumbling like ash in the wind. Because it wasn't just the city disappearing beneath us. It was everything I had fought to protect. The illusion of safety, the fragile independence, the quiet mornings where no one knew my name, all dissolving in the turbulence of his world, in the storm that always surrounded Adrian Moretti. The cabin was dim, lit only by the faint amber glow from the console, and outside, the night stretched endless and cold, a velvet sea pierced by the rhythmic flash of lights. I sat pressed against the window, my hands trembling in my lap, my reflection ghost-like in the glass. Pale face, wide eyes, lips slightly parted as if caught between a scream and a prayer. Across from me, Adrian sat in silence, his gaze fixed on me with that unnerving stillness that made my pulse throb in my throat. He didn't need to raise his voice to control the space. His presence did it for him, heavy and absolute, the kind of authority that made oxygen itself hesitate. It was unbearable, the way he looked at me, not just with anger, but with something deeper, something I couldn't name, as if he was trying to memorize me, to piece together the months he'd lost while I'd been hiding from him. I wanted to turn away, to pretend I didn't feel his gaze burning through me, but even when I did, I could still feel him, the weight of him, like gravity itself had shifted to pull me back into his orbit. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice finally broke the silence, low, controlled, but threaded with that edge of restrained fury I knew too well. It wasn't a question meant for answers. It was a wound searching for salt. I swallowed hard, my fingers twisting together, my voice small in comparison to his. You would have destroyed everything. Everything? He echoed, leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, eyes glinting beneath the soft light. What exactly did I destroy, amore mio? You disappeared. You left me without a word, without a trace. You think that wasn't destruction? I flinched at the sound of the endearment. Amore mio. My love. The words he used to whisper against my skin like a vow, now sharp enough to cut. You're twisting it, I said quietly, though my voice trembled. You know why I left, Adrian. I couldn't breathe in your world. Every day I woke up wondering if that was the day someone would put a bullet in your chest, or in mine. I couldn't live like that. Not then. Not with... I stopped myself before I said the word baby, but his eyes caught the hesitation, and the corner of his mouth lifted. Not in amusement, but in something darker. Not with my child growing inside you, he finished for me, his tone soft but dangerous, like silk over steel. The air between us thickened, pressing against my lungs until I thought I might choke on it. You don't get to claim that, I whispered, though the conviction in my voice faltered. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. I don't claim what's mine, Amelia. I protect it. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the sound was the only thing keeping me from crying. You call it protection. I call it control. You decide who I talk to, where I go, what I see, and you dress it up like care. My throat tightened. That's not love, Adrian. That's a prison. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. And yet you ran from me straight into a worse one, he murmured. You think you were free out there? You were just waiting for the wolves to find you. If I hadn't come, they would have. What are you talking about? I asked, frowning. He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a folded photograph. He tossed it onto the seat beside me, the paper fluttering like a wounded bird. I stared at it for a moment before picking it up. It was a picture of me, standing outside the diner where I worked, holding a grocery bag, looking over my shoulder as if I already knew I was being watched. My blood went cold. Who took this? Doesn't matter, he said, his voice flat. What matters is that they knew where you were, long before I did. They knew, Amelia. And if I know one thing about men like them, it's that they don't take pictures for memories. I stared at the photograph until the edges blurred, my mind spinning. Could it be true? Had someone else been watching me all this time? I wanted to accuse him of lying, of manipulating me, but the fear in his tone wasn't something he could fake. I'd heard that voice once before, years ago, the night everything fell apart. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I whispered, though I wasn't even sure who I was asking. He leaned closer, his hand braced against the seat, his face inches from mine. Because you wouldn't have believed me, he said softly. You would have thought it was another one of my games. And maybe you're right. Maybe I should have let you stay gone, let you live your quiet little life pretending the world wasn't coming for you. But then you sent that ultrasound, and suddenly, I didn't have a choice anymore. The words hung between us, heavy and unspoken, as his eyes dropped to my stomach, just for a second, before he forced himself to look away. I caught the flicker of emotion there, the disbelief, the fear, the impossible tenderness he was trying so hard to bury. And something inside me cracked. Adrian, I said softly, my voice shaking. What are you going to do with me? He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That depends, he said, on whether you can forgive me for what comes next. The helicopter tilted slightly as we began to descend again, the city lights rising up to meet us. I pressed a hand against the window, watching as the skyline shifted. Towers of glass and shadow, sharp and endless. I recognized the view before I saw the landing pad. His penthouse. I turned to him, panic clawing its way up my throat. No, Not there, I'm not going back there. His expression hardened, his tone final. You don't have a choice. The sound of the blades grew louder as we descended, the cabin filling with vibration, the windows trembling with the force of it. My heart raced. I could almost taste the memory of that place, the cold marble floors, the scent of his cologne lingering in the sheets, the echo of our last fight before I ran. It wasn't just a home, it was a reminder of everything I'd lost trying to love him. I pressed my back against the seat, shaking my head. You can't keep me there, Adrian. I'm not your prisoner. He turned toward me slowly, his eyes narrowing. Then stop acting like one. The words hit harder than I expected, because buried beneath them was the truth I didn't want to face. That part of me had stopped running long before he ever found me. That the moment I sent that message, something in me wanted him to see it, wanted him to come for me, to make the choice I couldn't make for myself. The helicopter touched down with a shudder, the door sliding open to reveal a line of his men standing in the cold wind, faces unreadable, dressed in black. Adrian stood first, buttoning his coat, his movements deliberate, controlled. Then he looked back at me, his expression unreadable, his voice low enough that only I could hear. You're not here as my captive, Amelia, he said, and for a brief second I almost believed him, until he added, You're here because you're mine, and I protect what's mine. He offered his hand, and though every rational thought screamed at me not to take it, my fingers reached for his almost involuntarily, drawn by that magnetic pull that had always been my undoing. As his hand closed around mine, warm and sure, I knew the truth. This wasn't rescue. It was surrender. And as he led me out of the helicopter and into the gleaming tower that loomed above the city, the wind whipping around us like a warning, I realized with bone-deep certainty that the real danger hadn't been being found. It was being wanted by Adrian Moretti again, because no one survived that twice. When the elevator doors slid open, the familiar scent of cedarwood and smoke greeted me like a ghost, haunting, intoxicating, impossible to forget. And for a moment I just stood there, frozen, as the memories I had spent months burying clawed their way to the surface, filling the space between every breath with echoes of who I had once been in this place, the woman who had loved a monster and convinced herself he could be saved. The penthouse hadn't changed, not really. It was still the same cathedral of glass and steel, perched above the restless city, all sharp lines and cold elegance, a world built to look untouchable. But beneath that perfection, I could feel the same chill I'd felt the last time I stood here, that subtle hum of danger that never left, the whisper of power that lingered in the air like smoke after gunfire. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, showing the sprawl of Manhattan glittering below, each light a distant promise of freedom I could see but never reach, and the marble floors reflected the faint gold of the chandeliers like water, beautiful but cold enough to remind me that this was no home. It was a kingdom, and I was its unwilling guest. Adrian walked ahead of me, his stride confident and silent, the soft thud of his shoes against the marble echoing through the vast space, his coat still damp from the mist of the helicopter landing. He didn't look back to see if I followed. He didn't have to. His presence filled every inch of the room, commanding without words, the kind of dominance that wasn't loud, but lived in the way people moved around him. Even the air seemed to wait for his permission to breathe. You remember the way? He said without turning, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down my spine, not from fear exactly, but from the familiarity of it, from the way it dragged me back into a rhythm I swore I'd forgotten. I remember everything, I replied quietly, though I wasn't sure if I meant it as a confession or a warning. He finally turned then, his gaze sweeping over me with a slowness that felt deliberate, his eyes dark and unreadable, though something flickered behind them. Not softness, not yet, but something more complicated, something almost human. He gestured toward the living room, that massive expanse of leather, glass, and shadow that once felt like a palace and now felt like a cage. Sit, he said simply. And because defiance felt pointless in that moment, I did. The leather couch was cool against my skin, and the city lights reflected off the windows, painting streaks of gold across the polished floor. For a long while, he said nothing, just poured himself a drink from the bar and watched me over the rim of the glass, the amber liquid catching the light like molten gold. The silence stretched, a living thing between us, until I couldn't bear it anymore. "What now?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended, my hands clasped tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. He took a slow sip, then set the glass down with a soft clink. "Now," he said, walking toward me with that measured grace that was uniquely his. "You stay here. You rest. You're safe." I let out a shaky laugh that didn't sound like me at all. "Safe?" I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "In your penthouse, surrounded by your men with no one to call, no place to go. That's not safety, Adrian. That's captivity dressed in luxury." He stopped in front of me, his shadow falling over mine. "You think I care what you call it?" he said quietly. "You and that child are staying here until I say otherwise. You can hate me for it, but you'll be alive to do it." His words struck something inside me. Anger, fear, maybe both. But beneath the sharp edges of his tone, there was something else too. Something I hadn't heard from him before. It wasn't just possession. It was desperation. The kind that comes from knowing you've already lost something you can't afford to lose again. "Why does it matter to you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You don't even know what to do with love, Adrian. You twist it, you control it, you ruin it until there's nothing left but ashes. Why should I believe this is any different?" He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the muscles in his jaw tighten, his eyes darken. "Because this time," he said finally, his voice low and rough, "I can't afford to lose you." The honesty in his tone disarmed me more than any threat ever could. I wanted to believe it was manipulation, another weapon from his arsenal of charm and cruelty. But the way he said it, the way his voice caught slightly on the last word, made it feel too real, too dangerous to dismiss. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city hummed beneath us, sirens distant, lights flickering in the endless dark. And I wondered if anyone down there could feel what I was feeling. That strange, heavy pull of being both trapped and wanted, protected and imprisoned all at once. He moved closer, crouching down until he was eye level with me, his gaze searching mine as if he could find forgiveness buried somewhere in the wreckage of what we used to be. "Tell me," he said softly, "do you really think I'd let anyone touch you? That I'd let them find out about the baby?" I looked away, my throat tightening. "You can't protect me from everything, Adrian. You can't protect me from you." He didn't flinch, but something in his eyes shifted. A quiet flicker of pain that he quickly buried beneath the familiar mask of control. "I'm trying," he said finally. "You don't have to believe me, but I am." For a long time, we just stared at each other, two people who had loved each other wrong and too deeply, sitting in the ruins of what that love had cost. And then, as if remembering who he was supposed to be, he stood abruptly, his expression hardening again. "There's a room prepared for you," he said, his voice clipped now, back to business. "It's the same one you used before. Clothes, food, anything you need. It's there." I wanted to refuse, to tell him I'd rather sleep on the floor of the elevator shaft than in that bed that still remembered his touch, but I didn't. I just nodded, too exhausted to fight anymore. He turned to leave, but before he did, he paused in the doorway. "Emilia," he said, and when I looked up, his expression had softened again, just slightly. "Don't try to run, not tonight." I didn't answer. He left, and the door closed behind him with a sound that felt too final, too heavy, like the sealing of a fate I hadn't agreed to. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the city below, my reflection ghosting across the glass. A woman trapped between fear and longing, between survival and surrender. Eventually, I stood and wandered down the hallway, every step echoing with memories I didn't want to relive. The walls were still lined with the same black and white photographs he used to collect. Old Italian streets, smoke curling from cigarettes, the ghosts of a past he'd never truly left behind. My fingers brushed against one of the frames, and I wondered if this was what love meant to him. Collecting beautiful things and keeping them locked behind glass where no one else could touch them. When I reached the bedroom, I hesitated in the doorway. It looked exactly the same. The dark sheets, the heavy curtains, the faint trace of his scent still clinging to the air. I stepped inside, feeling the weight of every memory pressing down on me. And for the first time in months, I let myself cry. Not quietly, not politely, but in deep, shaking sobs that tore through me until there was nothing left. And when I finally stopped, when the silence returned and I could hear my own heartbeat again, I realized something that terrified me even more than his world ever had. It wasn't just that I was trapped in Adrian's penthouse again. It was that part of me, the part I hated most, felt safer here than anywhere else. And that was the kind of truth that destroyed people. The days that followed blurred into each other like colors bleeding into water, time losing meaning within the sterile perfection of Adrian's penthouse, where everything was too quiet, too still, and every hour seemed to stretch endlessly under the weight of what was unspoken between us, until I began to feel like a ghost haunting the edges of my own life, trapped between wanting to be seen and praying to stay invisible. It was strange how quickly the body adapts to captivity when the prison is made of silk and marble, when the meals are brought to you on silver trays and the view from your cage looks like freedom painted in gold. I woke each morning to the sound of the city breathing beneath me, the distant hum of life that I was no longer a part of, and though I tried to tell myself that this isolation was temporary, that Adrian would eventually loosen his grip and let me go, deep down I knew that he had never been a man who believed in letting go of anything he considered his. He was gone most of the time. Meetings, calls, people coming and going through the private elevator that I wasn't allowed to use, but his presence lingered even when he wasn't there, carved into the rhythm of the space, into the scent that clung to the air, into the quiet tension that lived in every corner of that glass fortress. His men moved like shadows, silent and efficient, pretending not to see me as they passed through the hallways. But I could feel their eyes on me, could feel the way they watched, not with curiosity, but with duty, because I wasn't just a woman to them. I was leverage, the secret he was protecting, the weakness he could never afford to show the world. Sometimes, when the silence became unbearable, I'd wander into the library, that cavernous room filled with the smell of old paper and secrets, and trace my fingers along the spines of his books, wondering which ones he had actually read, and which were there simply to create the illusion of refinement. I'd find traces of him everywhere. A half-drunk glass of bourbon, a pen left open beside a ledger, a jacket thrown carelessly over a chair, and each discovery felt like a small invasion, like I was trespassing on the softer parts of him he never meant for anyone to see. I tried not to think about the ultrasound photo, the one that had started all of this, but it haunted me still, that tiny flicker of life, the pulse that had tethered me to him again in the cruelest possible way. I would sit on the edge of the bed some nights, one hand on my stomach, feeling the faintest flutter that wasn't quite movement, but promise, and wonder what kind of world I was bringing this child into. A world of power and danger and men who mistook violence for devotion. One evening, just as the sun was bleeding out across the skyline, painting the city in bruised shades of gold and red, Adrian came home earlier than usual. I heard the click of the door, the low murmur of his voice as he gave orders to someone outside, and then he was there, filling the room with his presence the way thunder fills a storm. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone, but even disheveled, he carried that same aura of command, the kind that made the air shift around him. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his tone softer than I expected, though there was still a hint of reprimand buried beneath it. I turned from the window where I'd been standing, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. "I wasn't aware I needed permission to look at the skyline," I said, and though my voice was steady, my pulse betrayed me. He studied me for a moment, then walked closer, his movements deliberate, predatory even in their grace. "You don't," he said finally, stopping just a few feet away. "But it's not the skyline I'm worried about." I frowned, folding my arms. "Then what is it you're worried about, Adrian? That I'll run? That I'll vanish again?" His eyes darkened. "That someone will come for you before I can stop them." Something in his tone made my stomach twist. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, and that alone was enough to send a ripple of fear through me, because Adrian Moretti was not a man who hesitated. "There's been movement," he said finally, running a hand through his hair, the gesture almost human in its weariness. "The Mancini family's been asking questions about me, about who I've been protecting. I have men watching every possible angle, but—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "You need to understand, Amelia. They won't go after me directly. They'll go after what they think can break me." My throat went dry. "You mean—" He nodded slowly. "You. And the baby." For a long time, I couldn't speak. The words hung between us like smoke, suffocating and unreal. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that no one could possibly care enough to come after me, that his world was too far from mine for it to touch me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true, because his world had already touched me once, and I was still bleeding from it. "What do you want me to do?" I asked quietly. He took a step closer, his voice dropping low, almost gentle. "Nothing. Just stay here. Stay safe. Let me handle the rest." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, as if safety could exist in a place like this, as if he could promise me sanctuary while the walls around us were built from violence. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. Not the kind that came from weakness, but the kind that came from having something to lose. "You think you can protect us from all of this," I said, my voice shaking now. "But how many enemies have you made, Adrian? How many lives have you ruined to build this empire? Do you really think it won't come for you?" He didn't answer, but the muscle in his jaw twitched, and his silence said more than words ever could. After a moment, he turned away, walking toward the window, the city lights casting long shadows across his face. "You don't understand," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I've done things I can't undo. There's blood on every inch of what I've built. And if I could take it back, if I could burn it all down to keep you safe, I would." The confession hung in the air, raw and heavy, and for a moment I almost believed him. Almost believed that beneath the cruelty, beneath the armor, there was still a man capable of love, capable of something pure. But love in Adrian's world wasn't pure. It was possession. It was sacrifice. It was the kind of love that consumed everything it touched. He turned back to me, his eyes dark and unreadable again. "I need you to trust me," he said, "just until this is over." I wanted to tell him I couldn't, that trust was a luxury neither of us could afford, but something in his voice, the exhaustion, the sincerity, stopped me. So I just nodded. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the faint hum of the city below, the soft creak of the floorboards as his men moved through the halls, and the echo of his words circling endlessly in my mind. I thought about the enemies he'd made, the blood on his hands, the danger that now circled closer each day, and for the first time, I realized that whatever fragile safety I thought I had here was an illusion. I turned toward the window, the lights of the city stretching out like stars, and pressed a hand to my stomach, whispering a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. "I'll protect you," I murmured, "even if I have to protect you from him." And somewhere beyond the glass, beneath the sound of sirens and wind, I swore I could hear the city whisper back. A warning, a prophecy, or maybe just the echo of my own fear, reminding me that in Adrian Moretti's world, secrets never stayed buried for long. The morning it happened began like any other, in that silent glass prison suspended above the city. A world so detached from the chaos below that it sometimes felt like time itself refused to move within its walls, as though the penthouse existed in its own realm, untouched by consequence or conscience, where days stretched endlessly, and nights bled into each other without distinction. I woke to the muted light of dawn filtering through the heavy curtains, the skyline wrapped in fog. The sound of distant traffic softened to a lullaby, and for a few stolen seconds, I allowed myself the luxury of pretending that I was somewhere else. Someone else. A woman who could open a window without fear, who could step outside without men in suits shadowing her every move. A woman who could simply breathe without the weight of his world pressing down on her chest. But then the illusion cracked, as it always did, when the intercom buzzed faintly from the hall. That small, clinical sound that meant the guards were changing shifts, a reminder that my freedom had been replaced by routine, my choices by surveillance. I rose slowly, my body heavier each day, one hand resting against the subtle curve of my stomach, feeling that quiet, persistent pulse of life that tethered me to the man I both feared and couldn't stop longing for. Adrian hadn't come home the night before. I had waited longer than I should have, pacing the length of the living room until the city outside turned from gold to black, convincing myself that his absence was a mercy, that I needed the distance, that his presence only tangled me further in threads I was already too weak to untie. But when dawn came and he still hadn't returned, a different kind of unease settled in my chest, not the ache of missing him, but the colder, sharper dread that something might have gone wrong. I tried not to think about it as I dressed, pulling on a soft sweater that hung loose around my growing body, and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of coffee, though I hadn't brewed any, and I frowned, a small instinctive reaction, because in this place even the smallest deviation felt monumental. The countertops gleamed, untouched as always, but something in the air felt different, the kind of stillness that isn't peace but anticipation, like the seconds before a storm breaks. I poured myself a glass of water and tried to shake the feeling, telling myself I was being paranoid, that my mind was inventing ghosts where there were none, that the only monsters here were the ones I already knew by name. And then I saw it, the envelope. It was resting on the kitchen counter, perfectly placed, stark against the marble, the kind of thing that shouldn't have been there because no one entered this penthouse without Adrian's permission. No one. For a moment, I just stared at it, my heart beginning to race, my thoughts scattering. It wasn't one of Adrian's letters. He never wrote, not when he could command instead, and it wasn't from his men, who would never dare to leave something so personal, so visible, without instructions. The paper was thick, cream-colored, elegant in a way that felt deliberate, and across the front, written in a precise, unfamiliar hand, was my name. Emilia. The sight of it made my breath catch. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, hesitation prickling at my skin like static. The envelope wasn't sealed, and for one brief second, I considered leaving it there, pretending I'd never seen it, waiting for Adrian to come home and handle whatever this was, because deep down, I already knew nothing good ever arrived uninvited in his world. But curiosity, or maybe fear disguised as courage, won, as it always did. I slid the paper free. Inside was a photograph, glossy and new, and the moment I saw it, my knees nearly gave out. It was me, standing in the penthouse window taken from outside, as if someone had been watching from one of the surrounding towers. The perspective was too precise, too intimate. I could see the outline of my body in the reflection of the glass, one hand resting on my stomach, my face turned toward the city, and scrawled across the bottom of the photo in red ink were 7 words that made my blood turn to ice. The child of Moretti will die first. For a heartbeat, the world stopped moving. The sound of my pulse roared in my ears, my breath shallow, the paper trembling in my hands. I looked around the kitchen, at the windows, the doorways, the shadows, suddenly certain that I wasn't alone, that someone was watching me even now. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. How had they gotten in? How long had they been watching? How could anyone breach his fortress? I backed away from the counter, clutching the photo to my chest, my throat tight with panic. My first instinct was to run. But where could I go? The penthouse was 20 floors above the street, locked behind reinforced glass and guards who answered only to him. I thought of the men stationed downstairs, of how little I actually knew about them. What if one of them had let someone in? What if the threat wasn't outside these walls but already inside? The intercom buzzed again, louder this time, insistent, and I jumped so hard the glass of water tipped over, spilling across the marble like a silver river. I stared at it, my heart hammering, and forced myself to breathe. I pressed the button. "Yes?" "Miss Rossi," came a voice, low, unfamiliar, calm in a way that made me uneasy. "Mr. Moretti requested that we check in. Everything all right up there?" I hesitated, gripping the counter for balance. My instinct screamed not to answer, not to trust, not to reveal what I'd found. "Everything's fine," I lied, my voice barely steady. "You don't need to come up." There was a pause, too long, too deliberate. Then, "Understood." The line went dead. I stayed there for what felt like hours, listening to the silence, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. No footsteps, no movement. Just the faint hum of the city outside and the whisper of the air vents above. Eventually, I sank onto one of the stools, the photo still clutched in my hand, my body shaking with adrenaline I couldn't burn off. By the time Adrian came home that evening, I was still sitting there, the envelope spread open on the counter, the photograph lying beside it like evidence. The moment he walked in and saw it, his entire body changed. The sharp intake of breath, the tightening of his jaw, the way his hand went instinctively to his gun even before he spoke. "Where did you get that?" His voice was low, lethal. "It was here," I whispered, "when I woke up. Someone left it." He crossed the room in 2 long strides, snatching the photo from the counter, his eyes scanning the words, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw something close to panic flicker beneath the surface of his control. He tore the picture in half, then again, until it was nothing but shreds in his fists. "How did they get in?" I asked, my voice breaking. "You said this place was safe, Adrian. You said no one could find us." He didn't answer. He turned instead to one of his men who had followed him inside, barking orders in rapid Italian, his tone sharp and furious, a language made of commands and threats. The man nodded and disappeared toward the elevator. When Adrian finally looked back at me, the mask was gone. He looked undone. "I'll find out who did this," he said, his voice low but trembling with something I'd never heard before. "And when I do, there won't be a piece of them left to bury." I wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that he could still control the chaos, that he could protect me and the life growing inside me. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected to find there. Fear. Real, human fear. "Adrian," I whispered, my voice shaking, "if they know where we are, if they can reach us here, what makes you think they won't try again?" He was silent for a long time before he answered, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. "Because next time," he said, "I'll be waiting for them." But as he turned away, his shoulders tense, his hand still clenched around the torn remains of the photograph, I realized something that chilled me even more than the threat itself. The man who had once seemed invincible was no longer certain he could keep me safe, and in that fragile sliver of doubt, I saw the truth I had been too afraid to name. The war that had been waiting outside had finally found its way in. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound that came before the fire. That strange, hollow silence that settles in the air like the world itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to break. It was the kind of stillness that doesn't feel peaceful but electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. And even though I didn't know why, even though I told myself I was imagining it, my body knew something was wrong long before my mind caught up. It was just past midnight, the city outside a sprawl of diamonds against black velvet, the sky heavy with rain that hadn't yet fallen, and I had been lying awake in bed, staring at the faint reflection of the skyline on the glass, tracing invisible constellations with my eyes, thinking about the photo, about the message, about how fear had become my closest companion. Adrian hadn't come to bed. I'd heard him on the phone in his office earlier, his voice low and clipped, speaking in that dangerous tone that meant something was unraveling. I told myself not to listen, but I caught fragments. Security feed. Breach. Inside contact. And though I didn't want to admit it, I understood that the illusion of safety was already gone. I remember sitting up, wrapping my arms around myself, trying to calm the rising tide of anxiety, when I heard it. A sharp metallic clang, faint but distinct, echoing from somewhere deep within the penthouse. For a moment, I thought it was just one of his men. A door, maybe, or a gun rack being closed. But then came the second sound, heavier, closer, followed by the unmistakable whine of the elevator's private shaft opening. My blood turned cold. I slid out of bed, my bare feet silent against the floor, and crept toward the door. The air felt strange, charged, heavy, and from the hallway came the muffled sound of voices, low and urgent. I recognized Adrian's tone first, rough and controlled, and another voice, unfamiliar, sharper, panicked. The words blurred together until one reached me clearly through the static of adrenaline. They're inside. The world tilted. Before I could move, before I could even breathe, the lights flickered once, twice, then went out. The penthouse plunged into darkness, the hum of electricity dying in an instant, replaced by the eerie, suffocating silence of a building gone dead. My heart was pounding so violently I could hear it in my ears, my hand gripping the doorframe for balance. And then, from somewhere below, came the sound I would remember for the rest of my life. The dull, concussive roar of an explosion, followed by the shattering of glass. I screamed before I even realized I had, the sound swallowed by the chaos that erupted all at once, the alarm blaring through the walls, red lights flashing to life, footsteps pounding against the marble floor. Smoke filled the air, acrid and choking, and somewhere beyond the haze I heard Adrian shouting my name, his voice raw, commanding, terrified. "Emilia!" I ran. I didn't think. I just moved, my body reacting faster than my mind, guided only by the desperate instinct to reach him. The hallway was already thick with smoke, the air burning my lungs, my vision swimming. I could barely see 2 feet ahead of me, but I knew this place, every corner, every turn. I had walked these halls enough times to find him even blind. When I stumbled into the living room, I saw the fire, a violent bloom of orange and gold consuming the far wall, where the glass windows had exploded outward, the city wind howling through the broken frame. The air was alive with heat and sound, gunfire cracking from somewhere down the corridor, the metallic scream of bullets ricocheting off marble and steel. And in the center of it all stood Adrian. He looked like something out of a nightmare and a dream all at once. Shirt half open, gun in hand, his face streaked with blood and smoke, his eyes burning with fury so fierce it almost didn't look human. When he saw me, for a heartbeat, everything else vanished. The fire, the gunshots, the chaos. And I saw only that look, the one that said he would kill the world itself before letting it take me. "Get down!" he shouted, crossing the room in a blur of motion. I dropped, just as a bullet shattered the mirror behind me, shards exploding across the floor. He grabbed me by the arm, his grip iron hard but shaking, pulling me behind the couch that was already smoldering at the edges. "What's happening?" I gasped, coughing, my voice hoarse from the smoke. His jaw was clenched, his breath ragged. "They found us. The Mancinis. But you said—" "I know what I said," he snapped, then caught himself, his eyes softening for half a second. "It doesn't matter now. We have to move." He pulled me to my feet, his hand never leaving mine, and dragged me toward the hallway, ducking as another round of bullets tore through the walls. I could hear shouting from the elevator, foreign voices, rough accents, men barking orders. The penthouse felt smaller now, collapsing inward with every explosion, every scream. We reached his office, a room I had always avoided because it smelled like secrets and danger, and he slammed the door behind us, locking it with a code I couldn't see. He pushed me toward the far wall, and for a moment I didn't understand what he was doing until he pressed his hand against one of the panels, and it slid open, revealing a narrow steel passage beyond. "A panic tunnel," he said quickly. "It leads to the basement. Stay close." I stared at him, my chest heaving. "You planned for this." He met my gaze, eyes dark and unreadable. "I planned for everything." We stepped inside, the door sealing behind us with a soft hiss, cutting off the sound of gunfire, leaving only the muffled echo of chaos fading above. The tunnel was narrow, lit by flickering emergency lights, and the air smelled of metal and oil. My heartbeat echoed off the walls, matching his as we ran. I could feel the tremor in his hand as he guided me, and for the first time, I realized he wasn't invincible. That the fear I saw in him wasn't for himself, but for me, for the life inside me that neither of us had planned for, but both of us were now bound to protect. When we reached the end of the tunnel, he pushed open a heavy door that led to an underground garage. The air was cold and damp, smelling faintly of gasoline and concrete. A single black SUV waited, engine running, one of his men in the driver's seat. Adrian helped me inside, his hand lingering for a moment against my back before he turned to bark orders in rapid Italian. "Adrian," I whispered, my voice breaking. "What if they won't," he said sharply, cutting me off as he climbed into the seat beside me. "They won't touch you, not while I'm breathing." As the car sped through the dark tunnel, the world above us still burning, I looked at him, this man I had loved and feared in equal measure, this man who had destroyed everything he touched and was now fighting to save the one thing he couldn't control. And I felt something shift inside me, something dangerous and undeniable. Because as terrifying as that night was, as the fire raged and the walls fell and everything I knew turned to smoke, I understood something I hadn't before. I wasn't running from Adrian anymore. I was running with him. And that realization, that choice, that surrender, it was both my salvation and my ruin. We emerged from the tunnel miles away from the city, the night sky streaked with the faint glow of the fire still consuming his world behind us. I turned to look out the window, the reflection of the flames flickering in the glass like ghosts, and whispered the only truth that made sense anymore. "They're not going to stop, are they?" Adrian's eyes met mine, hard and unyielding. "No," he said quietly, "not until they have what they want." "And what do they want?" He looked at me for a long time before answering, his voice barely above a whisper. "You." The word hung between us, heavier than the smoke, heavier than the night itself, and as the city disappeared behind us and the road stretched endlessly ahead, I knew the fire hadn't ended. It had only followed us into the dark. The night after, the fire felt endless, stretched thin across the fragile boundary between exhaustion and panic. The world reduced to the hum of tires against asphalt and the rhythmic whisper of wind slipping through the cracks of the SUV as we drove deeper into nowhere, chasing a silence that didn't want to be caught. The air inside the car was heavy, thick with the scent of smoke and sweat and fear, and I sat pressed against the window, my reflection ghost-like in the dark glass, watching the last faint glimmer of the burning skyline vanish behind us, until all that remained was shadow. Adrian hadn't spoken in hours, and though his eyes were fixed on the road ahead, I could feel the tension radiating from him like heat. the quiet fury of a man who had spent his life controlling everything, only to realize that power was useless against the one thing he couldn't predict: me. Every so often, his hand would tighten on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale beneath the dashboard lights, and I could almost see the war playing out inside him. The calculation, the rage, the guilt, all the things he would never admit aloud because admitting them would make him human. I wanted to speak, to ask where we were going, what was waiting for us when the road ended, but the words stayed trapped behind the lump in my throat. The adrenaline from the attack still pulsed beneath my skin, making it impossible to tell whether the tremor in my hands was fear or something far more dangerous. The realization that no matter how much destruction surrounded us, I still trusted him enough to stay. After what felt like an eternity, the car turned off the main highway and began climbing a narrow, winding road that cut through dense forest, the headlights slicing through mist that clung to the trees like ghosts reluctant to fade. Finally, we stopped in front of a secluded villa, large but unassuming, its stone facade half hidden by ivy, the kind of place that didn't appear on any map. Adrian cut the engine and sat there for a moment, his hand resting motionless on the gear shift, his jaw clenched tight, as if he were bracing himself for something unseen. "This place," he said at last, his voice low and rough, "was my mother's. No one knows about it. You'll be safe here." The words should have comforted me, but they didn't. Safety was just another illusion, one he clung to because it was easier than admitting that danger had already carved its name into both our lives. I followed him out of the car, the cold air biting against my skin, and when I looked up at the house, its windows dark, its walls silent, I felt a strange kind of dread settle in my bones. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of dust and rain-soaked wood, the echoes of a life long gone lingering in the quiet. Adrian moved with mechanical precision, checking the locks, the rooms, the shadows, his every gesture deliberate and controlled, while I stood by the doorway, arms wrapped around myself, trying to process the fact that I was still alive, that the baby was still alive, that somehow, against all logic, we had survived again. He poured himself a drink, whiskey, always whiskey, and for a while the only sound in the room was the faint clink of glass and the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the horizon. When he finally looked at me, his expression was unreadable, that dangerous calm that always came before his storms. "You knew this would happen," I said quietly, surprising even myself. "You've been waiting for it." His eyes flicked to mine, cold and sharp. "I've been preparing for it." I shook my head, taking a step closer. "There's a difference." He stared at me for a long time, and I could see the exhaustion beneath the anger now, the cracks in his armor that he tried so hard to hide. "You think I wanted this?" he asked, his voice low but trembling at the edges. "You think I wanted to bring you into this hell?" "I think you didn't stop it," I said, my voice softer now but no less steady. "You never do." For a moment, something passed through his eyes, a flicker of pain, gone as quickly as it came. He turned away, his back to me, staring out the window as if the darkness beyond it could offer answers neither of us had. "You don't understand what I've done to keep you alive," he said quietly. "What I've had to become." "I understand more than you think," I whispered, my hand unconsciously resting on my stomach. "But you're not protecting me, Adrian. You're trapping me. You're trying to keep me in a world that keeps trying to kill us both." He spun around at that, anger flashing in his eyes, but before he could speak, I said it, the truth I had been carrying like a shard of glass in my chest since the day I sent that ultrasound. I wasn't going to keep the baby. The silence that followed was unbearable. His face went still, not blank, but hollow, like I'd just emptied him of breath. For a long, fragile moment he didn't move, didn't speak, and I thought maybe he hadn't heard me, or maybe he was choosing not to. But then he took a single step forward, his voice barely more than a whisper. "What did you just say?" My throat tightened. I didn't know what else to do, I said, the words tumbling out now, heavy and unstoppable. You have no idea what it felt like. Finding out I was pregnant and realizing I couldn't bring a child into your world, into this blood and violence and fear. I wanted to give it up. Adoption, anything. I didn't want it to have your name, your legacy, your darkness. His expression fractured. Fury, disbelief, heartbreak, all flashing through him in waves too fast to contain. You would have taken my child, he said slowly, each word breaking apart as it left his lips, and given it to strangers? I would have given it a chance, I said, my voice shaking now. A chance to be something more than what we are. A chance to live without fear. He laughed, not out of amusement but despair, a sound sharp and bitter. You think you can erase me that easily? You think my blood doesn't run in its veins already? You can't save it from me, Amelia. You can't save yourself from me. The truth of that hit harder than any threat he'd ever made, because I knew, deep down, he was right. I couldn't save myself from him, not because he wouldn't let me, but because a part of me didn't want to. I turned away, tears stinging my eyes. I never wanted it to be like this, I whispered. I never wanted you to know. And yet you sent me that photo, he said, his voice suddenly soft again, dangerous in its quietness. Don't lie to me. You wanted me to see it. The accusation cut through me. I opened my mouth to deny it, to insist that it had been a mistake, but the words wouldn't come, because maybe, just maybe, he was right. Maybe some part of me had wanted him to know, to come for me, to end the running. Maybe I had been waiting for this moment all along. He took a step closer, his breath warm against my skin when he spoke. You can hate me all you want, but you'll never be free of me, Amelia. You're part of this now. You and that child. You belong to me. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I didn't look away. Then you'd better pray you can protect what you claim to own, I said quietly, because the world outside doesn't care who you are. The room went still. Outside, thunder cracked open the sky, rain finally beginning to fall, hammering against the windows in wild, furious rhythm. Adrian stared at me for a long time, his chest rising and falling, the muscles in his jaw tight, and then, without another word, he turned and walked out, the door closing behind him with a sound that echoed through the house like the shatter of something sacred. I stood there in the silence he left behind, my hands trembling, my heart breaking, and rebuilding all at once. For the first time, I understood what it meant to love someone who could destroy you, not just because of what he'd done, but because I knew I would let him do it again if it meant feeling this alive. And as the storm raged outside and the house trembled with the weight of all we hadn't said, I realized that the ultrasound hadn't just been a mistake. It had been a beginning that neither of us could survive unchanged. There comes a moment when silence is no longer a comfort, but a warning, when the stillness that fills the air feels less like peace and more like the breath before a scream. And in the days that followed our fight, the silence between Adrian and me became exactly that, sharp, unbearable, heavy enough to crush every fragile thing still holding us together. The villa became a tomb of unspoken words and restrained fury, the sound of rain on the windows like a metronome counting down to something inevitable, something neither of us wanted to name, but both could feel moving closer with every passing hour. He stopped sleeping. I could hear him pacing downstairs long after midnight, his footsteps slow and deliberate. The quiet murmur of his voice carried through the walls as he made calls I wasn't supposed to hear. His tone clipped and dangerous. Sometimes I'd catch fragments, names, orders, coordinates. And though I didn't understand the language, I understood the meaning. War was coming. He thought he could hide it from me. Thought I wouldn't notice the way his men came and went more frequently now, the way his jaw tightened when the phone rang, the way he looked at me with something between fear and farewell. But I knew, because I had lived long enough in his world to recognize what it looked like when the storm finally reached the door. I tried to keep my distance, but there was no distance in a place like this. The villa, though grand and beautiful, began to feel smaller every day, its walls shrinking around me like a trap, every window another reminder of how far from freedom I really was. I spent hours sitting by the fireplace, watching the flames devour the wood until only embers remained, and wondered if that was what love had done to us, burned bright enough to consume, leaving nothing behind but ash and the echo of what once was. One night, when the clock struck 3, I heard the door open downstairs, the sound of wet boots against stone, followed by voices, low, hurried, tense. I knew I shouldn't move, that whatever was happening wasn't meant for me, but something in the tone of those voices made my heart stop. I crept to the top of the staircase, every step careful, the faint glow from the hall below painting shadows across the walls. Adrian stood near the doorway, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his expression carved from stone, and before him knelt one of his men. Luca, I thought, the quiet one who always avoided my eyes. His face was bloodied, his lips split, his hands trembling as he held out a phone, the screen cracked and smeared with dirt. "They took 2 of ours," Luca rasped. "They're demanding my surrender," Adrian finished, his voice so calm it was almost cold. "Of course they are." I froze, my breath catching. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, and when he spoke again, it was softer, almost detached. "They want to end this the only way they know how. Blood for blood." My stomach twisted, dread sinking its claws deep. I stepped back, too quickly, and the stair creaked beneath me. Adrian's head snapped up. "Emilia," he said, his voice slicing through the air. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other. Me caught between guilt and fear. Him between anger and something far more dangerous. Resignation. He climbed the stairs slowly, each step deliberate, his eyes locked on mine. "You shouldn't be listening to this." "You're going after them," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Aren't you?" He didn't answer at first, but he didn't need to. The silence said everything. "I have to," he said finally, his voice low, steady. "They won't stop until I finish it." I shook my head, my pulse quickening. "And what then?" "When you kill them, someone else will come. There's always someone else. How many times will you trade blood for peace, Adrian, before there's nothing left of you?" His expression hardened, but beneath the anger I could see something fragile, the weight of exhaustion, of guilt, of knowing I was right. "You don't understand," he said quietly, his voice trembling at the edges. "If I don't end this, they'll come for you again, for the baby. There's no negotiation, no mercy. It's kill or be killed." "I don't want you to kill for me," I cried, my voice breaking. "I want you to live for us." The words hung between us, trembling like glass on the verge of shattering, and for a fleeting second I saw something in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or regret, before it disappeared behind the familiar wall of control. He reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek, his touch so gentle it felt almost like an apology. "You think I haven't tried?" he whispered. "Every time I look at you, I want to be better. I want to walk away from all of it. But I can't. Because the moment I stop being the monster, the world will tear everything I love apart." Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, blurring his face, and for the first time, I realized that beneath all his armor, beneath the fury and power, Adrian was just a man terrified of losing what little humanity he had left. "Then let me go," I said softly. "Let me protect what's left of us. If you love me—" He cut me off, his voice sharp, final. "Don't say it. Don't ask me to do something I can't survive." Before I could answer, his phone buzzed in his pocket. One vibration, urgent, insistent. He glanced at the screen, and I saw his entire expression change. They found them, he said, more to himself than to me. The ones who left the message. He turned toward the door, grabbing his coat, his gun, his resolve. Adrian, no, I said, moving toward him, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would break through my ribs. You can't go. Not like this. He paused, his hand on the doorknob, and looked back at me with that same devastating calm, the kind that comes when a man has already decided what he's willing to lose. I can't stay, he said. Not when they're still breathing. Then take me with you, I said, desperate now, reckless. If you're going to walk into hell, I'm not staying behind to wait for the flames. He stared at me, torn between fury and something almost like awe. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking, I said. I'm asking you not to die alone. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped again. Just us, the storm building outside, the sound of my heartbeat filling the silence. Then, without another word, he crossed the distance between us, grabbed me by the shoulders and kissed me, not gently, not sweetly, but with the kind of desperation that tastes like goodbye. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against mine, his voice breaking in a way I had never heard before. If anything happens, he said quietly, if I don't come back, don't, I whispered. Don't you dare finish that sentence. But he did. You run, you take the child and you disappear. Do you understand me? I shook my head, tears spilling freely now. I can't lose you, Adrian. I can't. He smiled then, a small, tragic smile, and brushed his thumb against my lips. You already have, he said. And then he was gone. The door closed, the sound echoing through the empty halls like a gunshot. And I stood there, unable to move, listening as the rain outside grew harder, the storm swelling to match the one inside me. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell, before I heard it. The sound of engines in the distance, the faint pop of gunfire carried through the night air, each shot like a heartbeat tearing itself apart. I ran to the window, pressing my palms against the cold glass, searching for any sign of him, for anything that would tell me he was still out there, still alive. And then I saw it, far across the valley, beyond the line of trees, a flash of light, then another, then a sound so deep it shook the ground beneath my feet. An explosion. The villa trembled, the lights flickered, and for a single paralyzing moment, the world went white. When I opened my eyes, the world was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that comes after devastation, heavy and absolute, as if the air itself is holding its breath in reverence for what has been lost. For a few long, disorienting moments, I didn't know where I was. I only knew the ache that lived in my bones and the faint metallic taste of blood on my tongue, the disjointed hum of reality reassembling itself around me like a shattered mirror piecing itself back together. The smell of smoke was the first thing that reached me, sharp and suffocating, followed by the realization that I was lying on cold stone, my body trembling, my hands scraped raw. The villa was half gone. The explosion had gutted it from the inside, tearing through the rooms like a vengeful spirit, leaving behind only fragments of what had once been beautiful, the cracked marble, the burnt edges of silk curtains fluttering in the wind, the faint crackle of something still burning in the distance. My head throbbed with every heartbeat, and when I tried to stand, a sharp pain shot through my ribs, forcing me to brace myself against the wall. My voice came out as a whisper, broken and uncertain. Adrian. His name slipped out before I could stop it. Instinctive, desperate, a plea and a prayer all at once. But the only answer I received was the sound of the storm outside, the rain finally falling in earnest, hissing as it met the smoldering ruins, the night sky bruised with smoke and firelight. I stumbled through the wreckage, every step in agony, calling for him again and again, until my voice was raw and the taste of fear became indistinguishable from the taste of grief. The last thing I remembered before the blast was his silhouette framed against the lightning, The way he'd turned one last time as he walked away, as if he wanted to memorize me in that moment, the way he always did before he went to war. He'd told me to run if something happened, told me to protect the child, told me to disappear. But how do you run when your soul refuses to leave the person it belongs to? When I reached what was left of the main hall, I saw them, 2 of Adrian's men, bloodied but alive, dragging debris aside, shouting orders into radios that no longer worked. One of them looked up when he saw me, his eyes widening, his expression torn between relief and something darker. "Miss Rossi," he said, his voice hoarse, his face pale beneath the soot. "You shouldn't be here." "Where is he?" I asked, barely able to speak. "Where is Adrian?" The silence that followed was worse than any answer. The man hesitated, his eyes darting away, his jaw tightening, and I felt the world tilt beneath me again. "Tell me," I demanded, louder now, my voice cracking under the weight of it. "Tell me where he is." He swallowed hard. "We found the car. It didn't make it down the road. There was gunfire, an ambush. We're still searching." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I wanted to scream, to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, that Adrian couldn't be gone, that men like him didn't die in fire and silence. They burned the world instead. But all that came out was a whisper. "No." He tried to say something else, but I didn't hear it. I turned and ran, out of the broken house, into the storm, barefoot and trembling, the rain washing the soot from my skin as if trying to erase the evidence of what had happened. The forest beyond the villa was dark and slick with mud, the road winding down the hill barely visible beneath the flood of rain. But I didn't stop. I followed the smell of smoke and gasoline, the faint glow of dying firelight in the distance, and when I reached the clearing, I saw the wreckage. The SUV was unrecognizable, twisted metal, flames licking at what remained of the tires. The windshield shattered into 1,000 glittering shards scattered across the wet ground like fallen stars. My breath caught in my throat, my heart pounding so violently it felt like it might break free from my chest. I moved closer, every step heavier than the last, praying for a miracle I already knew wouldn't come. And then I saw him. He was lying just beyond the wreck, half covered in mud and ash, his shirt torn, blood staining the ground beneath him. His eyes were closed, his skin pale, too still, too quiet. For a moment, the world around me ceased to exist. I fell to my knees beside him, my hands trembling as I reached for his face, brushing the dirt from his skin, whispering his name over and over as if the sound alone could bring him back. "Adrian, please, please open your eyes." I don't know how long I stayed there, cradling him in my arms, my tears mixing with the rain, my body shaking from something deeper than cold. The thunder rolled above us, and somewhere far away, I could hear the faint wail of sirens, but all I could see was his face, the man who had terrified me, loved me, ruined me, saved me. I pressed my forehead against his chest, listening for a heartbeat, and when I thought I heard the faintest flutter, I almost convinced myself it was real. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I'll never know for certain. They pulled me away eventually, his men, their faces grim and silent, their hands gentle but unyielding. They said they would take care of him, that I needed to go, that he would want me safe. But as they dragged me toward the waiting car, I looked back one last time, and in the flicker of lightning, I could have sworn I saw his lips move, just slightly, as if forming my name. And then the world went dark again. Months passed before I could bring myself to speak of that night. The doctor said it was a miracle that I survived, that the baby was healthy, strong, resilient, words I never associated with myself, but which somehow seemed fitting for the child of Adrian Moretti. I lived quietly after that, far from the city, under a name that wasn't mine, in a house where no one knew who I was or what I had lost. Sometimes I would sit by the window at night, holding my son, our son, and watch the rain fall the way it had that night, each drop a memory I couldn't quite let go of. He had Adrian's eyes, that same piercing darkness that seemed to see too much, and when he looked at me, I felt both blessed and haunted. I told myself I would raise him differently, that I would protect him from the world his father came from. But some nights, when the wind howled through the trees and the shadows lengthened across the walls, I would catch myself whispering his father's name into the silence, as if he might still be out there somewhere, watching, waiting. Because the truth, the one I could never speak aloud, was that I never found a body. They said the fire had been too strong, that nothing could have survived it, but I knew Adrian better than anyone. Death was too easy for a man like him. He didn't vanish into flames. He became them. And so I lived each day with that ache, that quiet, unbearable hope that somewhere in the dark corners of this world, he was still out there, rebuilding, waiting for the moment he could step out of the shadows again. Sometimes, when the night is very still, I swear I hear it, the low hum of a helicopter in the distance, the rhythmic beat of its blades echoing across the sky. My heart always stops when I do, my breath catching, my body frozen between fear and longing. Because I know what it means. It means the past never really dies. It means the ghosts we love never really leave us. And maybe, just maybe, it means that one day, when the sky burns red again and the world holds its breath before the storm, I'll look up and see him there. The man I sent an ultrasound to by mistake. The man who told me to get in the helicopter. The man who became both my curse and my salvation, coming back for me one last time. And when he does, I won't run. This time, I'll be ready.